This is the Business Storytelling Show with Christoph Trapp. Name a top 20 storytelling podcast and a top 5% podcast globally, Christoph chats with thought leaders and experts to share tips and tricks that can help you tell your company's stories better to drive business results. Available wherever you listen to podcasts, live streamed on major social media channels, and part of the DB&A television network, available on most U.S. television sets and streaming on Roku and Amazon Fire. Here's Christoph with today's episode. Let's go.
Let's go, business storytellers. Hey, how's everyone doing? Episode 540. Still moving along here, talking about business storytelling and everything related to it. All the different things you have to think about, you have to consider. Even if you never do them, you still want to at least think about that. And today we want to talk about content localization. And certainly, I don't know, when I think about localization, I think about Amazon serving me the correct Amazon.com and not the Amazon.de, for example. That's Amazon Germany. And sometimes, maybe my worst localization story, quite frankly, is when I'm traveling in Europe, or I was in Hong Kong a few years ago, and they serve you the local sites, but I don't speak the local language. I don't speak Spanish, and I can't even figure out what the website says. So we want to talk about how do you have to think about content localization? When do you use it? How do you use it? And are there ways to overdo it? There probably are. So let's find out. Kate Kenyon, she's on the show today. Content and Localization Operations Executive Director, JP Morgan Chase. Really happy to have her on the show today. Welcome, Kate.
Nice to see you.
Always fist bumping. Always appreciate if you are listening to the podcast version and want to see us fist bump, head on over to Spotify, because that's where a video version runs as well. Kate, welcome to the show. Now, localization. Tell me about that. I mean, you spend your days in content ops and localization operations. What does that mean? How do we have to think about localization of content and how does that even play out?
Yeah. Localization is, as you said, as reading a site, I'm abroad and I want to be able to, and you want to be able to go into another. Localization is more than that. Localization is get correct, accurate content that you are in. And this can be language, but in different parts of the same. An example of one from like my previous at Babylon, which is a health the content that we state of the US versus another state of the US around something like birth control from one place to another. So we would have content in one place, but then localized for a different area, be able to serve that to you very locally. The state that you're in can actually mean changing something and localizing it for a different market. As like to Expedia, we 44 languages, I think, content that you needed to for the was quite different from the content to get people to part with their dollar. Pack markets wanted to see much more offering look like and one service end. That was very much the content is much more localized towards like and business center. So it's more than just getting the right content for each market.
It's very interesting to me when we think about that. I mean, you even mentioned the different states when it comes to abortion and other things. But how do we, as a company? I mean, a bigger company makes sense to me, right? They want to think about localization for different content pieces. But how do we, as a company, like at what point do we need to think about that? I mean, even on my blog, which is a personal blog, christophtrapp.com, but I'm not selling anything, but it has a good audience by now, other than a book here and there. And I think about localization sometimes, like maybe if somebody in India, I show them a different story or whatever it might be. But that's really more me just I don't know, lack of a better term, playing around, right? Trying different things. When should companies think about that? When should companies consider um, localization? I mean, at a level that actually makes sense to them.
Mm-hmm. I think it's first of all, good content is good in every language, and because I suspect we're probably not as a world is already way ahead and already loaded. They read on the internet every day. The Google Lens for translate, it's all grown up to things, and it will translate very good these days. So that is all places for people who are already consuming local languages. When you like, I think the tipping point language to be able to. So if you have products sold, then you need to be able to speak to customers, and on items as well. A cheap undertaking. We've all got like horror stories of like it's really badly. Thing that you should do like, and it's a continuous cost as well. Content isn't going to stay the same. You're going to have to keep doing it. But if you make money in an area, then you're really, again, a story from Expedia, open source API, where a third party, you could basically say like a white label Expedia's hotels, and no traction in Japan and just for hotel bookings. But if you don't translate the developer's Bible into how to do, you're not going to get any traction. You say it out loud, but translate just about sale in the market.
Interesting. So, of course, like everything in life, you have to kind of measure the ROI. And, if it's not working in Japan, why would you be doing it in Japan? But if it's working in, some other country, and especially when you can, attribute dollars to it. So, which kind of makes me think about there's like two work streams for everything nowadays, it seems like, right? There's like the human piece, like, I know there is AI tools out there to write content. I haven't found one yet that's as good as I'd like it to be. I mean, some are getting closer and closer and closer. And one of these days, I will be able to write content through an AI tool, assuming I have the source material, certainly. But nonetheless, there's always the human aspect, right? Somebody has to supervise the machine. Somebody has to set the strategy, whatever it might be. Then you have the stuff the machines do, right? Like they just, they serve you the content dynamically. What is that mix when it comes to localization? I mean, is it 50-50? Is it, maybe we can put an exact number on it, but you know what I mean? Like, how do you think about part is the machines and this part we need humans for, whatever that piece might be?
It's actually within localization. Machine translation, you the box, you are training the machine. How you might always have your own special lexicon. I mean, certainly in Chase, accounts which have got their own names. How do you manage, for example, vocabulary, and then training a machine that takes time. I mean, an untrained machine will usually give you call it a post editing distance. So it's like your standard post edit words will need a little tweak before they can be like a well-trained machine. You can 0.5%. So those you're training with. I mean, machines are getting. I would say that's an average, though. Machines work really, really well. Like the longer the document is, so where they use things like microcopy in tiny string with like 5 words in it. Who knows? I mean, now pull of a word in English, it's like, do you mean move forward, continue, next week? You know, what do you mean by that? You've got no context around it. They're off using humans.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I produced the Real Talk, the Customer Insight Show, and Andy Bearclaw, the founder and CTO, who's actually based there in the UK, he was on there talking about natural language processing. And I think one thing that people need to remember, and I know it's hard because we want everything to be perfect, but it gets better over time, right? It's learning as we're going.
Sure.
So I think that's probably a part here too, because I mean, why am I getting, I mean, if I'm on a totally new website, let's say I was in Malaga, Spain earlier this summer, I don't speak Spanish. And if somebody serves me the Spanish language website of a site I've never been on, I get it. But if I visit a site that I visit all the time, even in the US, makes no sense to me that I'm being served the Spanish version of that website, because they know that I speak English. They know where I'm from. I'm not new. So at some point you would think that they figure that out, right? Or is that just my experience when it comes to these kind of localization strategies?
Thing. What they're doing there is using GIS to determine preference, and that, as you've experienced, it's a really annoying if you're different language. The language preferences is actually you find they do tend to make an inference between your locale, like switch preference Spanish. Now, correct, but not everybody. For example, which has like some people, so it's equivalent to the UK. German, yeah, that's their top language. Turkish. So around people's preferred language alone. A option is to use geolocation. In Spain, we're going to serve you content in Spanish. The more complicated, you're in Spain, but would you like us to talk to you in? Can have some complications as well when links are available to you in each country as well. Within banking, in Chase and the US are very different in Chase and the UK. Same language, you might.
It's very interesting. Now, talk to me a little bit about your background. I always like to, we don't usually do it at the beginning, but maybe halfway through. Talk about your background in why do you care about content, and you're, when I look at your experience, it's content, localization, UX, and all that is together, right? And that always excites me because, quite frankly, they all kind of fit together. They all have a connection. And so certainly that can be very helpful to have that being led by one person. But talk about your experience in why is this topic of interest to you, and why do you, why'd you make a career out of it, for lack of a better term?
A career. I've always been a words person. But my first job was journalism, really. I worked for the BBC. So I said, okay, well, we make our own websites, Facebook. Good luck with that. And websites, basic ones. And from there, how content is managed and stored a bit. And I progressed just looking at how content is not just, optimized. Eventually retired. That is an important. And I mean, I've been doing this like now, I think, and stopped interesting me. It's the number of ways we do things has changed, but get lesson is still something that I get a kick out. I like localization extension of that. It's the tech piece of it. I really enjoy watching how the tools that linguists use. I see my job now is really making a space, good writing and good translation, to have the infrastructure, the people, the tech that you need to do that. Not good enough to just be it's not enough if no one's helping you do your job, is to make that happen.
Mm-hmm. Very, very, very interesting. And so, the one thing as you were talking that I was thinking about is when you talk about localizing content for all these different areas, I mean, even just the states of the United States. I mean, I guess the abortion example, you can look that up, right? You can say, okay, here's what's going on here. Here's what, I mean, you can totally, like, I'm not sure you need to know much about Alabama to know what Alabama's stand on that is, right? Like, or you can just look that up. But there's some things that they're not as tangible, right? They're not as easy to look up. So like, how do people in Mississippi, how do they react to certain content? How is that different from people in Iowa or, the Pacific Northwest? And then let's forget about just the United States, but other countries. So every once in a while I run into people and they say, well, how much experience do people have running a global brand and blah, blah, knowing all these kids? How much do you actually have to know about each market? And if you do, how do you learn it? Or how do you do it? Do you know what I mean? Like, how do you prepare to do something like that?
Yeah, it's a localization that is, if you take away the word personalization, I think it's fairly ununderstandable to people, because people are like, oh, foreign languages, I don't know. Personalization that you need, what that you're selling, how universal is it? How complicated could it be in each market? There's a really good example of where personalized to you based on your credit scores, the country that you live in, the country that you live in, make for a need for vision and a high degree of, like, feel like before somebody can buy something. I wouldn't say that applies, and certainly when it comes to most of the companies that I've worked with, when they look at marketing, they tend to global to local model. So like world level in a way that's universal and all of our customers, and then at a local level to make it. Now, I'll give you an example from when I worked in GSK Pharma some years ago, but if you're asking the drug Ventolin, Ventolin's been around for like 40. It's actually still a really new drug in Brazil. So UK and in the US and the UK is this is the drug that you can trust, and it's very proven effective, and it's this really big new thing. So it can vary depending on things like your purity as well. I mean, for just of the narrative, and then at a local level, it is tweaked.
I think my mute button there didn't work for a second. So, so some of it, what you said there too, is it's about. I mean, some of it is actually dictated too by local laws, right? So if you can show a certain pharmaceutical type content in the UK, but you can show it in wherever, Missouri, in the United States, you have to do it. It doesn't make any difference whether or not it's working. That's the law. So certainly that's an interesting way to talk about that too. But how do you know? I mean, I grew up in Germany, so certainly I still got some of those German traits and values and behaviors and whatnot. And I can tell you how German um, culture was when I grew up, which is now not yesterday, right? I mean, certainly it has evolved as well. And I can give you my opinion, but and like everybody can give everybody their opinion, right? But how do we know that localization is working? I mean, the government says, yep, you're following all the rules. That's certainly one thing in some of those highly regulated industries. But in general, how do we know that it's working? How do we know it's hitting the right tone and showing the right content? Are there metrics or is it all anecdotal?
No, they're very clear. I mean, we between localization disciplines like research. Certainly before I would go into a significant amount of research that happens around, as you say, at a product, like wearing a brand, where is this positioned, new tone of voice. So a lot of that happens. You even editing one word into another. Between the Germany and the UK for banking, Germany's 70% still cash. I mean, in the UK, it's COVID. I rarely have a blip, 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 blip. And in Germany, much less. So a lot of cash and much less card usage. Things like that will influence the attitudes towards banking, more institutional, formal. So in which we talk to people, so to the formal Z, then it be products that you're offering, they're being understood. Research before we'd start.
I think the one thing, so as you just mentioned that, what came to my mind too is when I was in Birmingham a couple months ago, 10 weeks ago maybe, and one time I paid at a restaurant and I said, where did I put my card? And he said, already did it, right? It already did the near whatever. And I didn't realize it was doing it until I got that little notification. And then, so that's cool. But like in Germany, I mean, every time I'm in Germany, the internet doesn't work well. I mean, I'm totally over stereotyping it here, but you're driving in a bus in Bavaria and your internet on your phone is horrible, right? And I've had that many, many times. But what I don't know is, and this is maybe an interesting discussion point, is it that Germans don't want the technology or that they just haven't gotten it, right? So if I am looking forward and I actually want it, I might have a very different need for content than if I'm opposing it, right? Like, how do we know?
Honestly, if I had an answer to that question right now, knowing, do you build what people want or do you build some? I mean, if there's that wonderful, like, asked the people, they said they wanted a faster horse. Based on that one, I don't know how much people to a new experience until the environment is ready for them to understand. You can't really have a digital only bank if you access and your society oriented. So choosing your market, and those are with localization alone. I keep in the world in the right language, but something you want to buy, then you're still not.
It's certainly an interesting question. And Nick Graham of Mondelez on Real Talk, the Customer Insights show, actually used that same quote and said that quote, people quote it all the time and say, it does not give us customer insights. And he says, it totally gives you customer insights because you know what? They don't know to answer I need a car, right? But they certainly can they certainly are telling you they want to go faster. And then we have to figure out what is it that can go faster, whether that's a car or whatever it might be. And I always, I mean, he put that in such great context. Kate, tell us, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you sharing your insights today on today's episode. Tell us, where do people connect with you and how do they find you?
You full-time at the moment on Chase has only been launched in the UK bank for a year now, into other territories soon. So if anybody is, they should hit me up on LinkedIn. I seem like mad very soon.
That's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Please rate and review our show on your favorite podcast channels. And don't forget to share this episode with your networks. We appreciate you. Until next time.